Hello, horses and men of the Polish army. We're all about to die. The year is 1939. As we speak, the Wehrmacht is infiltrating our borders, launching false flag attacks, and preparing to blame us for them to the international community. Our government believes that Britain and France will come to our rescue, but the joke's on us. The Allies have no such intention. Their plan is to just let us get conquered and return our country to independence after the war is over. Which, by the way, they expect to take several years. In the meantime, we'll simply have to endure the horrors of Nazi occupation. I'll be honest, the future does not look bright for us. But worry not, for as our anthem reminds us, Poland is not yet lost. So you can call me Ezekiel. And this is how Germany and the Soviet Union conquered Europe together. By the final months of 1939, Hitler's Germany had neutralized all but one nation along its eastern border. Austria had been Anschlussed, Czechoslovakia partitioned between Germany, Poland, Hungary, and Germany's new Slovak puppet state, and Lithuania was too terrified to act against Germany, even handing over their province of Memel. Only Poland remained defiant. While at war with the Allies, the Poles could threaten Germany with a two-front war at any time. That was the impetus for Germany's new alliance with its former geostrategic rival and ideological enemy, the Soviet Union. According to their Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of August 22nd, Germany and Russia would invade Poland together and occupy it. Not only would this place the Soviet Union, now a friendly nation, on Germany's eastern border, they also agreed to supply the Germans with raw materials they needed to wage war against the Allies. The Germans planned to invade on the 26th, just 4 days after signing the alliance, but a few sudden discoveries forced them to delay. First, the Germans found out that its other partners of Hungary and Italy were unwilling to follow them into war. The Hungarians were historic friends to the Poles and did not want to join what seemed to be the losing side of a war. The Italians, Germany's ally since the Pact of Steel in May 1939, made clear at the time that they needed years to prepare for war. The Germans had only given them a couple of months. To discourage the Germans, the Italians told them that Britain and France were definitely willing to go to war over Poland, and told the Allies that they would stay neutral if that happened. The Lithuanians were also invited to join the invasion. Their prize would have been Vilnius, their historic capital which had been held against them by the Poles since the end of the Polish-Soviet War. But the Lithuanians were unwilling to be complicit in Germany's plans. Between the threat of Britain and France, and being abandoned by most of its partners, the invasion was delayed to September 1st. German diplomats were supposed to use this time to shear the Allies off their Polish commitments, but when that proved impossible, they decided that they would simply have to fight the Allies too. The Nazis towed a fine line between justifying war to the German people and preventing a rerun of Munich. To do this, their seemingly reasonable demands were announced to the German people, but withheld from the Allies until the last possible moment. This went as far as von Ribbentrop, Germany's foreign minister, refusing to give a copy of German demands to Britain's ambassador on the midnight between August 30th and 31st. The incident almost ended in a physical altercation, which is what's going to actually happen to more than 70% of you watching this video while not being subscribed. Just look at this, watching a 40-minute history video without subscribing or even hitting the bell. Shame what has to happen now. On September 1st, 1939, the Germans invaded Poland along the main German-Polish border, from their enclave in East Prussia, and across Poland's border with the German puppet state of Slovakia. The first battle of the war began when the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein shelled the Polish military transport depot on the Westerplatte Peninsula in the Danzig harbor. Popular imagination likes to think of the invasion force as an elite mechanized army. That's certainly the image the Germans of 1939 wanted the world to have. But the reality was not so flattering. Of the 54 divisions invading Poland, only 15 featured any amount of mechanization. Most of the German army was either carried on horseback or marched into Poland. The Poles chose to delay their mobilization until the last possible moment. This was partly because their weak economy could not withstand a long mobilization. But diplomacy played a far greater role. With the First World War in living memory, mobilization was viewed as the act of an aggressor. The Allies wanted Poland not to mobilize in hopes it could avert war, while the Poles didn't want to mobilize to ensure they were seen as the victims. That would both ensure international support and hopefully territorial gains after they'd won. The late mobilization worked as intended. The world saw Germany as the aggressor, and both Britain and France came to Poland's aid. The Germans were particularly frustrated by this, as they were hoping to have a real act of Polish aggression to go alongside all the ones they fabricated. But late mobilization was a disaster for the Polish army. While the Wehrmacht may not have been the model of a modern army, the Polish forces were much worse off. All three of its branches were smaller and poorly equipped, disadvantages accentuated by the late mobilization. As soon as the invasion began, the small Polish fleet fled to the North Sea, where they rendezvoused with the British Navy. The obsolete Air Force was quickly shot down, and the army fled east. Man, those Latvians sure are silly. I gave them independence just a few years ago, and they're already messing it up. I guess they just weren't ready for freedom. America! That's our cousin you're talking about, and his name's Poland! That can't be true. I'm 1/32 Italian. You're that too! How do you figure that? I'll prove it. Please spit into this tube. Sorry. Now we just need to send it to MyHeritage. That's right. MyHeritage, the #1 family history service, is the sponsor of today's video. We love to talk about the history of global conflicts and whole nations on this channel. But how about your own family's history? That's what MyHeritage will help you find out. With just a little bit of information, MyHeritage will craft your family tree before your very eyes. Using the information we put in, we can find out that America has quite a few relations. Oh, and there's Poland right there. I wonder how we got so many relatives. I see. Classic. With over 19 billion documents on file, MyHeritage will find exactly what you're looking for and even a few fascinating pieces you didn't know existed. Their Instant Discoveries feature can help you find whole branches of your family tree you didn't know you had, family photographs, records, and more. They'll even repair, colorize, enhance, and animate those pictures. Using our exclusive link in the description, you'll get a 14-day free trial to learn all about your family history. But you need to act fast, because this offer is only available for a limited time. Huh, looks like I am Romanian. No, it says you're Polish! Oh, wait. No, you're Romanian too. Neat. I guess I should go help Latvia out. But this does get me wondering what kind of crazy relations you have, Canada. I don't want to talk about it. Thank you, MyHeritage, for supporting our history videos on YouTube. Click our exclusive link in the description to get a 14-day free trial and start discovering your family history today. And now, back to the video. The British, once champions of appeasement, insisted to the French that they issue a prompt ultimatum demanding immediate German withdrawal from Poland. But France dithered. They wanted more time to evacuate their civilians and to mobilize troops. Only British threats to go to war alone compelled France to sign on September 3rd. After the ultimatum's deadline passed with no response, the Allies declared war. Following Britain into war were the dominions of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and even the seemingly Axis-sympathetic South Africa, after a change in its government. British India declared war without even consulting its major political parties. In early October, the Allies agreed on additional war goals to add to their casus belli of defending Poland. Czechoslovakia and Poland were to be restored to full independence. Germany was to be disarmed, so it couldn't possibly start a Third World War. And Hitler's government, recalcitrant even in the face of its own international agreements, was to be replaced with a new one who the Allies could actually work with. While those goals sounded good on paper, Britain and France had little will or means to achieve them. Despite overwhelming superiority along the Franco-German border, the French only pushed 8 kilometers into the Saarland. Despite the absence of any meaningful resistance, the French then withdrew back behind their defenses, where they'd stay for the rest of the year. And so, instead of forcing the Germans to fight a two-front war, the Allies stuck to their lethargic pre-war plans of sitting back, generating forces, and starving out the Germans. A process the British Secretary of State for War expected to take at least 5 years. On paper, defending Poland's independence was the justification behind Britain, France, and the Commonwealth's declarations of war on Germany. But the Allies had no intention of saving it. The Poles could only hope to be restored to independence after the war was over. Until then, the country was left to its fate. The retreating Poles hoped to dig in at the Romanian bridgehead, a corridor between the neutral Soviet, Hungarian, and Romanian borders. They'd hold there until the French could launch their falsely promised offensive into Germany. Aware that Poland might try to prolong the war from its thickly forested and swampy east, German diplomats urged the Russians to join the invasion as soon as possible. They pointed out that Polish defenses were rapidly collapsing, and that if they captured territory assigned to the Soviets by treaty, they might have cause to keep it anyway. But the Russians didn't believe that Poland would fall so quickly, nor were they ready for war so soon after signing the alliance. The Red Army was still mobilizing its forces and fighting a border conflict with Japan in the east. The Russians also wanted to avoid appearing as collaborators, preferring to give the appearance of saving historically Russian territory from a defeated Poland. Most of those problems would resolve themselves. The Japanese were continuing the border conflict under the mistaken belief that they could ally with Germany against Russia. But with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact making that impossible, the Japanese had no reason to continue. A ceasefire was agreed on September 15th. On the 17th, the Red Army invaded Poland. The Poles had no choice but to abandon the Romanian bridgehead. Most of the army fled into Romania, with other units slipping across the borders of Hungary and Lithuania. As the Russian army and Wehrmacht met across Poland, fighting broke out between them, a result of German troops not being told about the partition lines with the Soviets, but the matter was quickly settled. In the words of historian Gerhard L. Weinberg, 1 million Polish soldiers had been captured by the Germans and Russians. Over 100,000 had died. Something over 200,000 had fled across the borders. The whole country was once again occupied by foreign troops, who would install new systems of terror, one animated by racial and the other by class ideology. The victors' losses were far smaller. The German casualties of about 45,000 would affect her subsequent campaigns and military buildup only minimally, while the Soviet casualties of 2,600 barely justified Stalin's proud assertion of December 1939 that the friendship of Germany and the Soviet Union had been cemented with blood. The original Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact set the German-Soviet border at the Vistula River. But in the wake of Poland's rapid defeat, a series of amendments were agreed to on September 28th. These included border adjustments that left Germany with a larger share of Poland, but transferred Lithuania to the Russian sphere. They also agreed to a population exchange, allowing the Baltic Germans, who'd otherwise soon find themselves living under Soviet rule, to move into German-occupied Poland. Lastly, economic cooperation between the signatories was increased, giving Germany much-needed raw materials to fight its Second World War. At the time of the conquest, the Germans hadn't yet decided what they wanted to do with their new Polish territory. They briefly considered leaving a rump Polish state between themselves and the Russians, but the Soviets didn't want that, so it was instead decided that for the first time since 1918, Germany and Russia would share a common border. The lion's share of Germany's new territory was annexed directly into the Reich, with no resemblance to the borders of 1918. The Poles living in those areas were marked for expulsion, usually without their property. The only place for most of those refugees to flee to was the technically not annexed, but still German-occupied territory known as the General Government. Even here, Poles would endure extreme exploitation and were marked for eventual removal to make space for German settlement. To reward its loyalty and encourage other nations to join Germany, 300 square miles of Poland were handed over to Slovakia. The Slovaks also won Soviet recognition, which was very nice for a state few other nations considered legitimate. With Eastern Europe settled between them, Germany and the Soviet Union called, in one voice, for the Allies to end their pointless war and accept the new Nazi-Soviet order. So leave a handshake emoji in the comments to commemorate this collaboration between Germany and the Soviet Union, something that will no doubt continue and not bring any negative long-term consequences for either participant. Looking only at the Franco-German border, one would be forgiven for thinking that there was no war at all between Germany and the Western Allies, but the story was different at sea. In preparation to raid Allied shipping, the Kriegsmarine sent 2 pocket battleships and 16 submarines into the Atlantic before the war began. This was a massive risk for the German Navy, as the nation's leaders did not give it a high priority. The Kriegsmarine was only given enough resources to finish construction on the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, battleships Bismarck and Tirpitz, and to continue work on one of 2 aircraft carriers. If any of those ships were lost, there would be no replacements. Only smaller vessels like submarines and destroyers would continue to be built. It would not take long for those submarines to prove their worth, though. On September 17th, the aircraft carrier HMS Courage was sunk off the coast of Ireland by a U-boat, while ironically performing anti-submarine duties. This taught the British a hard lesson that capital ships were not suited to the role. On October 14th, U-47 penetrated the British naval base at Scapa Flow and sank the battleship Royal Oak. Out in the Atlantic, submarine raids on their shipping forced the Allies to re-implement the convoy system from World War I. On December 13th, the first real naval battle of the war was fought around the coasts of Argentina and Uruguay. In this Battle of the River Plate, the Royal Navy hunted down and forced the German pocket battleship Graf Spee to be scuttled, though most of the ship's crew would find their way back to Germany with the help of the Soviet Union. German diplomats told the neutral nations of Western Europe that their neutralities would be respected, and threatened war if they tried to help the Allies. All chose to heed these warnings and remain neutral, unaware of the fact that Germany had long since decided to conquer them at an opportune moment. Even after the conquest of Poland, the Italians remained neutral, though they did entertain the possibility of invading Yugoslavia. Their pact of steel with the Germans would continue to face friction over distrust, differences in ideology, and German delays implementing an agreement to resettle ethnic Germans from the formerly Austrian province of South Tyrol into Germany. The other major pro-Axis neutral was Spain. It had only been a few months since the Nationalists defeated the Communists in their civil war. While sympathetic to the Germans, who helped them win that civil war, the Spanish were not shy about their unpreparedness for another, even larger conflict. The country relied on food and petroleum imports, which the Allies could cut at any time. The Spanish would even sign a trade agreement with the Allies in 1940. Though outright invasion was off the table, German submarines were allowed to repair and refuel in Spanish harbors, and a large German intelligence network was allowed to operate inside the country. Other nations had to buy their neutrality. To the north, Sweden sourced Germany's high-grade iron. In return for arms deliveries, the Yugoslavs supplied Germany with copper, deliveries which the Germans intentionally held up. Yugoslavia had received offers from the Allies to open a third front against the Germans by landing Allied troops in Salonika. But Belgrade was more concerned about Italy, who the Allies couldn't help them with. It was Romania's situation that was the most complicated of the early war. The Germans wanted oil from its rich fields, which British and French nationals happened to hold a large stake in. The British also tried to sabotage the oil fields and transport networks. All the while, the Russians, Bulgarians, and Hungarians pushed their claims on Romanian territory. Given the circumstances, the Romanians navigated this situation with great finesse. In return for weapons, neutrality, and silencing complaints about letting the Polish army escape through their territory, the Romanians sold Germany their oil up to limits proportional with the Allied stakes. The Soviet problem took care of itself when they got themselves bogged down in a conflict with Finland. Only Bulgaria and Hungary remained as threats, but they were too weak to fight Romania themselves. For the time being, Romania was secure. One nation that was able to resist Germany without any compromise was Turkey. The Germans were interested in its rich chromium deposits, but instead of playing ball, the Turks signed an alliance with the Western powers in October, allowing them to halt all chromium shipments to Germany. In the Western Hemisphere, the nations of Central and South America held a conference in September. There, the neutrality of the entire hemisphere was affirmed, and a neutral zone in the Atlantic unanimously endorsed. The Latin Americans even expressed interest in working with the United States, something the State Department took full advantage of.
Meanwhile, in Soviet Russia.
Not now!
Okay.
Even before completing the conquest of Poland, the Russians began collecting the rest of their East European spoils. Between September and October, the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were bullied into signing mutual assistance pacts that stationed Soviet troops within their borders. Though the Lithuanians, following amendments to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and Russia's long-standing recognition of the city as their rightful capital, were granted Vilnius. In the Balkans, Bulgaria was viewed as a likely target for another mutual assistance pact, though theirs would be unique in that it did not require the stationing of any Soviet troops in the country. While Bulgaria shared territorial aspirations against Romania, and its people were historic friends to the Russians, its monarchist government could not bring itself to make a deal with the communists. The Soviets also tried pressuring Turkey into working with Germany, and Romania to ceding Bessarabia to themselves, the resolutions to which we already covered. What truly saved those Balkan nations from suffering the fate of the Baltics, with whom they're so often confused, was the Finland debacle. The Russians spent 1938 and 1939 trying to negotiate a border adjustment with the Finns to create a buffer zone between Leningrad and the Finnish border. Uninterested, the Finns just played the Germans off of them. But now, with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact placing Finland in the Russian sphere, the Germans were out of the equation. The Soviets could force the issue. Finnish diplomats were summoned to Moscow to hear Russia's final demands. They included a mutual assistance pact, which would mean a Red Army base in their country, and the handover of Karelia and the Rybaki Peninsula, for which Finland would be compensated with parts of East Karelia. While the talks started out promising, they ended inconclusively on November 9th. The Russians committed to war. On November 26th, the Red Army fired artillery at its own men and blamed the incident on Finland. Casus belli in hand, the Red Army invaded on November 29th. The Winter War between Finland and the Soviet Union was infamously a disaster for the Russians. We cover the conflict in depth in our other videos. For our purposes here, what matters is that the war would drag on for months and cost the Red Army hundreds of thousands of men and mountains of equipment. As the debacle unfolded, it would assume a central role in the world war raging around it. The conflict presented the Allies with two opportunities. The first was to prolong it by sending weapons and supplies to Finland. Any resources the Russians wasted on the Finns would not go to helping Germany fight the Allies. The more radical option was to use the war as justification to place Allied armies in Scandinavia. With the Finns enjoying overwhelming international support, the French and British believed they could convince or pressure Sweden and Norway into allowing their troops to cross their countries into Finland. But only a token force would be sent to help the Finns, because the Allies' real goal was to pressure Sweden into halting its iron ore shipments and then protect it from German retaliation. The French especially supported the scheme, as it was a way to keep the war off French soil. Since this war certainly meant war with Russia, as neither the Allies nor Soviet Union had ever declared war on each other, plans were made to bomb the Caucasus oil fields, to deny its petroleum to the Germans. But, frankly, the plan was absurd on many counts. The Finns had no interest in being the Allies' stooge. And, even if they were that desperate, there was no way Sweden or Norway would let Allied armies across their countries. Unfortunately for the Scandinavians, violating their neutrality was something the Germans were not nearly as bothered about. Back in Germany, plans were being made to finally strike west. Looking back on the last war, it was believed that France could only be defeated through years of grinding conflict. But advances in military technology seemed to change Britain's situation. The balance of sea power was more in Britain's favor than during the last war. This should have guaranteed the safety of the home islands. But in the world of 1939, where the bomber was overestimated and fighter defense poorly understood, air power seemed like a way to knock Britain out of the war. The German plan was to invade and occupy parts of Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and northern France. Unlike the Schlieffen Plan of the Great War, this was not meant as a knockout blow against the French, but as a way to secure air bases from which to bomb England into submission. As plans to invade the Low Countries were debated, a second scheme to occupy Norway was prepared. This was partly in response to German knowledge of Allied plans to invade Scandinavia, but was also in line with German naval thinking from before the war. Like during the Great War, the short German coast made it possible for the Royal Navy to bottle up the Kriegsmarine in port. The new thinking went that if Germany could occupy Norway, its naval bases could be used to circumvent the blockade and attack Allied shipping. The Soviets had offered their base in Murmansk, but the ports of Norway were much more desirable. But there were other reasons to conquer Norway. Occupying the country would secure Swedish iron exports, increase German influence in Scandinavia, and aligned with Nazi ideology. Like the other Scandinavians, National Socialism viewed the Norwegians as an Aryan people, candidates for inclusion into the Greater German Reich. So after the war, Norway would not be released, but incorporated into Germany's Aryan Empire. With Denmark between the Germans and Norway, it was decided that it would have to be conquered too. This plan to invade and occupy 2/3 of Scandinavia was dubbed Operation Weserubung. As the launch date for Weserubung approached, much of the rationale behind the invasion seemed to disappear. On March 13th, the Winter War ended in a Pyrrhic Soviet victory, resulting in a minor border adjustment in Russia's favor. This ended the Allies' best opportunity to deploy armies to the region. Moreover, the plans for invading France and the Low Countries were changing too. Instead of invading to seize airports, the new plan was a knockout blow against France. If successful, it would mean the Kriegsmarine could station ships on the French coast, far superior to any base in Norway. The decision to cancel Weserubung came down to Hitler, but the man was undeterred. He believed that surprise and audacity would carry the day. So on April 1st, German ships were loaded with men and supplies, and the Air Force prepared to support them. Plain-clothed German officers were pre-positioned in Copenhagen and Oslo to take command of troops as they landed. On April 9th, 1940, Germany invaded Denmark on land and sea. The Danes, Norwegians, and allies at large were caught completely by surprise. As hoped, the Danish government was shocked into surrender within a remarkably short 6 hours. One of Germany's primary objectives was Norway's northernmost port of Narvik. Being the most distant point from Germany, it would also be the hardest to take. They'd be helped by one Vidkun Quisling, a man whose name would become synonymous with selling out one's own country. The Norwegian commander at Narvik's defenses happened to be a Quisling supporter. He planned to surrender the base as soon as German forces arrived. Moreover, as former German war minister, Quisling provided the Germans with military intelligence on how to conquer his country as quickly as possible. 10 destroyers would sail to Narvik to offload troops. But the vast distances meant that those transports would have to be refueled and repaired at sea. This was only possible thanks to the Soviet Union, who allowed the German tanker John Wellem a base near Murmansk. From there, it would meet the German destroyers at Narvik and refuel them. Surprise was even more important in Norway than it was in Denmark. Without it, the superior Royal Navy would sink the German fleet before critical numbers of troops could land. Norway was invaded on the same day as Denmark, and just like happened in Denmark, surprise was achieved. German troops simultaneously landed at multiple key points along Norway's massive coastline. While their defense of Norway was broadly a failure, the Norwegian military did achieve a victory in destroying Germany's newest heavy cruiser Blücher. Not far from the capital at Oslo, the vessel was sunk by an old Krupp gun and torpedoes purchased from the long-dead state of Austria-Hungary. With the invasion now a fact, Quisling chose to reveal his role to the public, only to be met with scorn. Combined with the Norwegian government's successful evacuation, it became clear that the country would not fold like Denmark. British, French, and Polish troops were quickly landed around Trondheim, Namsos, and Andalsnes. But the Germans landed their own reinforcements at their captured ports and airfields, the latter being used to also secure air superiority. All of this forced the Allies to evacuate from central Norway. While the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe were stacking up victories, the Kriegsmarine was being decimated. The crews of those 10 modern destroyers left their ships in the fjord so they could join the army in fighting Allied landings, but they became stranded after the Royal Navy found and destroyed their ships. Between May and June, British submarines torpedoed the German battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, taking them out of action until December. Thanks to successful delaying actions against German reinforcements, Narvik would fall into Allied hands by the end of May. But that would be cold comfort against events transpiring in the West. Because, as fighting raged on in Norway, the Germans completed their preparations to strike west. Their plans had changed considerably since those early November days. Now, the fate of the world was going to be decided by a single grand military maneuver, and the Allies' ability to respond to it. But that's going to have to be the topic of our next video, because this has been how Germany and the Soviet Union conquered Europe together. This video was funded by Stalinist agitators as a part of their efforts to convince the Western Allies to make peace with their partner, the German Reich, a move that surely won't backfire on them in any way, including their chief agitators, Feline Man, G.S. Rogers, Josiah, happy belated birthday dude, Karazin, Lord Inquisitor Zarius Drackhart, Pater, Petri von Steiff, Swiss Cheesus, the Raven Union, and the Union of X. And by this video's sponsor, MyHeritage. Use our exclusive link in the description to get a 14-day free trial and learn about your family history today. But you'd better act fast, because this offer is only available for a limited time. Links to where you can support us directly are also in the description. Like, comment, and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.